Okay, everyone, welcome. I'm going to do a short introduction to why we're here, and then I'll introduce the panel. So we're here today, the day after Women's Day at the Women of the World Festival, to discuss the highly complex subject of sustainable ethical fashion. Sustainability and corporate social responsibility, whether it's genuine or cosmetic, is a defining theme of the 21st century. And the issues it presents to the fashion industry are broad-ranging, including labour abuses, toxic chemical use, and conspicuous consumption. Today we're going to take a long hard look at our stuff to the girls' wardrobes and question our attitude towards shopping for and acquiring clothes and fashion, whether it's £20 jeans, £200 trainers or £1,500 cashmere, and everything in between. As this festival is dedicated to women of the world, it's to women we turn to educate us, tell us their stories and share their wisdom on how we can become better, more thinking consumers. Also, it is women we honour, as it's women who are the primary makers of our clothes. So, why did we call this event From Louboutins to Landfill, How to be a Sustainable Fashionista? Well, it's because a shoe like a Louboutin, it's something that is made by someone who's paid well, whose skills are respected, from materials that are carefully sourced. These are items that can be resold and rehealed, and I have checked with Louboutin, the red soles can be redone. You have to send them off, but they get done, and you can keep using them, and you can hand them on. However, we do need strategies for using our clothes better, for longer, and to stop them becoming landfill and slow down the cycle. The ethical industry in Britain is worth approximately £200 million, and it's growing faster than almost any other ethical sector. But there are many other ways to be an ethical consumer of fashion, and it's this that we explore today. So as we go through the next hour, we'll be compiling a list of ideas on how to do this. Then debating it down to a focus manifesto, I hope, that we can share across all our platforms. There are going to be people who have some tips that are in the audience that I'm pretty sure will have things to offer. You know who you are, but it's the four people sitting alongside me here who are going to change the way we see clothes in the next hour. I'd like to introduce you. I'll do further, deeper introductions in a few moments, but we have Dr Kate Fletcher from the London College of Fashion's Centre for Sustainable Fashion here. We have Jacqueline Shaw, who is a designer and expert on African fashion and sustainable cotton production. We have Abigail Chisman, who is one of the founding editors of Vogue.com, a passionate advocate of designer clothing, and who now runs Designer Jumble Sale, giving clothes second, third, fourth, fifth, many, many lives. Finally, we have Carrie Summers, founder of the world's first fair trade certified company, and it's Pacha Cutie.
That's right.
Yes, I always got it wrong before, but and also the woman who founded Fashion Revolution Day, which we'll be hearing more about later. Welcome, ladies. Thank you. So I'll move straight into Dr Kate Fletcher, who will be demystifying her pioneering academic approach, which has included work on relationships we foster with our clothes, which she calls craft of use, as well as helping businesses, organisations and students to understand what she calls, and what we should all call, slow fashion and local wisdom. Kate has published numerous books and papers on the subject. Hi, Kate. So I'm going to start just by asking you the big one. Can you sum up what you do in your work?
Thanks, Mel. Hi, everybody. Well, what do I do? I suppose I was thinking about this and I thought, gosh, what is it? And I think that perhaps it's best described about designing future visions, which sometimes includes garments, future visions for fashion that explore ideas about how we might live. These aren't necessarily how we live at the moment, but they're future ideas that link us into possible different, better ways of doing things. And I think that perhaps to do that, you need to do two things. The first is you have to really ground yourself in the actual situation that we live in. You have to find out about where materials come from, what they mean. You have to look at the supply chain and think about supply chain efficiencies and transparency of that supply chain. You have to look to workers, the rights, the conditions of workers. You have to look at issues of consumption, because let's face it, they are monumental within the situation that we're in at the moment. You have to think about anxiety that's created by fashion systems. You have to think about wastefulness. It's a huge span. And at the same time as hanging on to all of those things that actually are where we are at the moment, you have to do something else. And this perhaps is, for me, the exciting bit. You have to stray outside of that understanding. You have to be prepared to unthink those things that you think are just the way it is. And you have to ask difficult questions, fundamental questions about, well, why is it sort of like that? And we have to think about ideas of what thriving for humans and natural systems mean and what role fashion plays in that. And I would say that what we have to really recognise is that it's a very different business to the one that we're used to. What I'm talking about is something that isn't shaped in the high street at the moment. And I think it's also important to say that we should all look at what's happening now. And if we don't like what we see, we shouldn't fool ourselves. We should say it's unpropitious, and we should think, okay, what can we do to change that? But I also think that it's really important that we are optimists of the spirit, that we are prepared to think and do things differently. And I think that that is what we can do. It's certainly the case that most people's ideas about fashion today are really shaped in shopping for new clothes. That's pretty much all they can imagine fashion is. And I think that we have to begin to think about different ways of thinking about fashion, a broader spectrum of activity that actually allows us to engage with it, which isn't just within a system of production and consumption that is sort of mindless in many ways.
Wow.
Okay.
Do you see your role as your role is to highlight all these things for us?
I suppose so, but it's also it's a journey that I've been on for probably like over 20 years now. And yeah, I mean, it's a journey, I suppose, for me personally that I went on. It started with an engagement with materials, and it's ended up in this really interesting social space. So it's been this journey towards social phenomena, effectively towards people, towards relationships. And that's the exciting thing about fashion, is that it's not only a material object that we're talking about here, it's about the relationships between people.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned obviously that this your what you've just shared with us had a beginning, and that beginning was when we were talking before this. You mentioned to me that you're not conscious of ever being not sustainably minded, which I think is certainly, most people can't say that. Most people may have a moment where they realise, and they may have been carrying on for a while as an adult or a young person and not being in that way. So how is it that you cannot remember not being that way?
Well, as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm from Liverpool, and I don't know, my engagement with sustainability isn't because I was surrounded by nature. Where I lived in inner city Liverpool, there wasn't a tree in sight. And I'm not exaggerating. People really, it's not true. Terraced houses, backyards. It's the sort of stuff that shapes you in certain ways. Certainly what I did as a kid is I rode around on a very battered bike, and to make it new, we just put stickers on it. It was sort of normal. And I mean, the street that I grew up in was a street where there was a vibrant community, and my parents were very, very active in that community. And I would say that perhaps it's their sensibility, their engagement with people and what that means, that shaped my sustainability perspective. It's also the case that they were both great makers and menders of things, not particularly clothes, just everything. They were just getting by fixing stuff. And so once again, that became very normal for me. I made my school uniform. Making clothes was just what I did, and it was just sort of what happened in Liverpool. But I also think that growing up in the 70s and 80s in a northern city, if anyone else grew up in such a place, you'll know how bleak it was. I think it's different for the southeast sometimes. But actually, growing up in Margaret Thatcher's Britain, you realise that change was essential and inevitable. And so perhaps that's what's happened. My unconventional approach is because that's what I experienced growing up.
So you touched on this at the beginning, but you are a fan of fashion and style. And you understand the desire for clothes and want it. The idea that desire should mean, or no, don't want to get my words wrong, that desire would create a need for something new to be put on or something to be refreshed. But yet the system, as you mentioned, is a mess. People think that to get something new, people think to be fashionable they need to buy something new. But that's created a system whereby it doesn't work. So can you just explain why the fashion system, in really simple terms, doesn't work?
Okay, well, it doesn't work for many reasons. Perhaps the first is, well, where would I begin? I just would say that the original understanding of what fashion was many, many years ago was not buying something new. It was making together in small groups. And how far away from that are we now? But reasons why things are a mess, well, perhaps you would start by saying it's a mess because making clothes uses loads of energy, it uses loads of water, loads of other materials. It's polluting, it's wasteful. And then it's a mess because too many garments are bought. It's a simple it's a numbers thing. So many garments are bought, and irrespective of all the fabulous work that is going on in the supply chain to make everything just a bit more eco-friendly, and things are getting better, irrespective of that, the gains that are delivered by better supply chains are completely overshadowed by our astonishing appetite for unlimited consumption. We just keep on buying more than any savings can deliver. So it's a mess also because the fashion system is based on economic systems that are founded on a model of economic growth, and business models measure success by more sales, increasing throughput, and so we're just in a system that's just trying to grow and grow and grow on a planet that's finite. There's something really wrong with that. It's a mess because the products of this system just really don't make us happy. And it's a mess because really we lack the vision, the imagination to think about different ways of doing things. So it's like a mess on loads of different levels. But I am also optimistic, so let's just say that. That's such a negative thing to say.
So obviously you work with companies and organisations, and what do you do with those people? When a company says, help, I'm a mess, how can you help me become better? What does that involve? I mean, there's such a huge question, but there's people here that will be experts on sustainable fashion and people here that have never thought about it before in their life. And obviously you've got your systems, you develop craft of use, which you could tell us a little bit about. Is that something you share with your organisations, or is that more of a people thing?
Well, that's a sort of a different way of engaging with ideas around sustainability. When I'm talking to companies, I suppose I would do a lot of listening, first of all. And also I would really encourage them not necessarily to jump onto like a materials or a supply chain fix for everything, because certainly most of the answers that people need are all about a change in the way they think.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take a lot of materials, doesn't really take any resources, doesn't take any massive investment. It just takes a different engagement within the mind. And I think that is pretty much the best thing that they can do. But specifically thinking about the Craft of Use project, so Bethan, are we on that one now?
Yeah, we are. Can you see?
Okay, so and don't keep no, that's fine. So for the last 5 years I've been doing a project just talking to the public about what they do with their garments, and it's a way really to think about what fashion is really outside of just a binary relationship between producing and then consuming. If you think about it only in those terms, that's what people do with it. They sort of try to shop it as a solution. How can we be more ethical? Oh, we can just buy a recycled version. But actually what I've been trying to do is to talk to people about things in a different way and try to develop it's a sort of a language and a visual language to a certain extent, which is putting garments and what we do with them and opportunities for fashion in a different place. So I suppose I would say that fashion is a shared enterprise. It's not just the preserve of designers. It's not about high-end brands. It's something that actually happens in a very political space in your lives, in your wardrobes, in your homes. And when you think of it like that, it becomes a really charged opportunity to do actually something where we have the power, all of us who have clothes and wear them.
Can you tell me the story of this man?
This guy is 82. So actually this is where I live. I live in the north of England in the Peak District. And so this was the guy who came to see me. I have these community photo shoots. He turned up. He was 82. He couldn't climb the stairs into the place we were shooting, so he got photographed on the side of the canal. And he brought with him this, he described it as a 3-stage jacket. So he brought it with him. And it was a slim waistcoat when it had been given to him 40 years before. And what he chose to do when he put a few pounds on and could no longer fasten it at the front, he took a pair of scissors to the back of it and slit it up the back. I mean, brave move. And then he knitted that panel and inserted it down the back. A few years later, he thought, this really needs some sleeves. He knitted the cream sleeves, you can see, did a waistband and a collar, carried on wearing it, and then maybe 10 years later, a few more pounds put on, he couldn't fasten it at the front, and he created latchets, his word, like little leatherette straps, which to sort of cover the bulge, which he finished with a sequin. This guy is remarkable, and what he is showing that it is possible to do things, to experience novelty in fashion, but with a single garment that goes and becomes something. So it's through the sort of the craft, the skills of remaking. So what you see, so we call it the craft of use, and it's effectively because many of the skills that you see in the craft of production, somebody's attention to detail over time, their cultivated ideas, their thoughtfulness, their innovation, they apply just to using stuff. And I tell you, it's remarkable what is going on. Can we have the second one? And this is a woman called Jean. She's also in her 80s. And this is a dress that she was given probably 50 years before. I mean, both of these are very old garments, but it's not typical of what we see when we talk to the public. But so Jean was given this, and then she went to the Riviera and all these other various fabulous places in this dress, and felt it was fabulous. But it was really coveted by her daughters, if we can see the next slide. And so what we had, so it came to this photo shoot, the whole family came along. So there were 3 daughters and 2 granddaughters and Jean as well. So 6 members of the same family actively share the same dress. So in terms of one garment meeting many people's needs, I mean, is there a better example? But also, is there a better example of the way that we think about what garments are and their place in our lives, and how that they can become this thing, this mechanism also for them to communicate, have you got that dress? I really want that dress. And there's particularly the daughter with the dark hair is very, very possessive over it, apparently. And so it goes on. But there are many, many more of these stories. But I suppose what it does is it gives sustainability within fashion a perspective which really isn't about what you can buy, but it's about agency. It's about your ability to ask, why is it like this, and can it be otherwise? And it really can.
It's really, really great. It's so inspiring, and it does just change the way you think about clothes, and just in an instant, it's like a click in the mind. How do you incorporate it in the my next question, slow fashion, is that the same as craft of use, or is that you encouraging people to take more time over the way they consume their clothes?
I suppose it's a bit of a misnomer to say that it's all about speed. It's not just about slowness, but it's a bit like, I suppose ideas around slow and fashion were very much inspired by the slow food movement. And in slow food, it wasn't just about saying, all food needs to be consumed extremely slowly. It was about trying to politicise what food was, but also recognise that it's a great place to experience pleasure. And I would say that the ideas around slow and fashion are similarly about saying, actually, fashion without responsibility is really bad. We don't want that. But responsibility without fashion is actually really boring and sad. So we sort of need to make sure that we bring them all together, and we need to recognise that fashion speaks to us in the sort of the core of our human culture, in who we are as people, and we need to bring that on this journey to this other place where we're thriving individuals, where we are more human, I suppose, in various ways. And I think that it does that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kate. That's a really great way to start, and real food for thought. So now introducing Jacqueline Shaw.
Hello.
Hello. It's a sustainable fashion polymath. In fact, she's an expert on African fashion and cotton production, is the founder of an eco wedding dress label, and also a full-time swimwear designer for a large retail chain in Germany. Jacqueline self-published her book Fashion Africa in 2011, which was republished last week by Jacaranda Books in conjunction with an event at SOAS. The book is a guide to the designers, materials and sustainable practices available on continental Africa. Jacqueline is as I said, a working designer, and also holds an MA in ethical fashion. Welcome, Jacqueline.
Thank you.
It's difficult to know where to start with you, as you do. There's so many different plates spinning. You grew up in London wanting to be a designer. You attended Surrey, where you gained your BA in fashion, and then you went into the workforce. When we spoke before the event, you told me that you both love and hate fashion. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, because just growing up, me myself, I love textiles, and like Kate was talking about, her relationship with textiles is kind of how she got into fashion and her interest there. That was something that kind of brought me into fashion, just looking at textiles, just like it's amazing how they're constructed. But I also found that the way fashion kind of dictates to us how we should look, I'd look in magazines and they weren't women that looked like me, it just felt that it kind of dictated to you how you should look and how you should be. And working in the industry, you kind of realise it's not as glamorous as you may have thought, and this is just very much a dictatorship. So I do love it. I love seeing product go through. I love seeing creativity. I love to just see something come from nothing. And that's what I do really love about fashion. But the other side of it, the dirty side, the dark side, is what I don't really like.
It's interesting to think that all fabrics came from someone somewhere being crafty, being inventive, and that's the thing that you attracted you and that you fell in love with. And it's almost the craft of youth and enjoying.
Yeah, I've got some slides on here. If you can go to the one with the man. Yeah, this was taken when I was in the Gambia and a few years ago. And this craft it's on a hand loom, so it's something that's traditional. It's been going there for how many years I can't even say. It's a long time, generations, and it's something that especially they're doing in the Gambia. They're doing quite a few African countries, and somewhere like in like Ghana, they'll have their kente, and each country will have their own traditional hand-woven fabric, but it's something which brings a community together. So the men would sit around, and it's something that it's not just about the craft, but it's about community, and that's something that even today is lacking. Being my family are from the Caribbean, and black males may not have that kind of community here in the UK, where they just sit together and have this craft that brings them together, and then they give it passed down to their sons and their grandsons and so on and so on. And even speaking to that man, he was saying his son probably won't do it. His father did it, his grandfather did it, and he's doing it. But his son probably won't, because now they're esteeming to be, they're looking at the US and they're esteeming to be someone else. And they want to sit down and be on the loom all day. So it's something that's kind of dying out, which is quite sad.
Mm-hmm. They all want to be they want to be Jay-Z and work it. The next question is really to address the fact that you work in a fast fashion environment.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So my career has been working for sports brands, quite a few sports brands, and on the high street as well, and right now definitely for a retailer as well. And the company I work for do a lot with sourcing sustainable cotton, and they do have a sustainable program, and so the last company I was at also did as well. I can say that I was working at Puma, which had like a great sustainable CSR plan, and they also did some things in Africa using cotton made in Africa, and these sort of things are great. But then it's the flip side of you're talking about consumerism, and you have to keep up with the trends. But the idea is that they're trying to do things differently, sustainably, and thinking about their sourcing. And where I'm working, the company has a lot. Their quality issues and their standards are very high. So some things won't pass because of their standards.
Yeah, that's true. But also, as Kate pointed out, and as we all know, there's something that Abby said at a certain point, was that there's fashion and then there's the high street. It's just a business that's all they want to do is make the most money they can from, and then to sell more and more of it, so that to get us to buy more of it. And how do you experience that in your day-to-day working life? That must be a thing that you have to do every day.
Yeah, and it's very stressful. Sometimes you just want to kind of stop and just focus on something and keep going. I remember it was Hussein Shalayan, who was a creative director at Puma at one point, but before he was, I remember reading somewhere that he said that not every season you have to, I hate this term, but reinvent the wheel. You can just focus on one thing and keep that going and develop it. And that's how fashion should be. It should not just be, okay, this season is about animal print, next season is about flowers, and next season blah, blah, blah. Because you don't even get a chance to really appreciate what you're wearing before you go in. You have to get the next big thing. So that is the biggest problem.
Yeah. It's kind of why I decided to get acquainted, to do this, because I feel like so many fashion magazines, it's just the whole thing is like, what's the next trend? What's the next thing we've got to tell everyone about? It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
But as you're doing swimwear.
I do swimwear, and it's fun. It's different to my Africa stuff, but I mean, it's work and it's something that I do. I can do design, so I enjoy that. But I mean, my passion is looking at African fashion and.
Did that come into your life through Puma, or was that before?
No, it was like Kate was saying, my relationship with fabrics and textile, things like seeing hand loomed fabrics, things that are crafted by the hand. You just have this, like somebody's worked on something with their hands. It's got a story. It's got a part of them within that piece of fabric. It's not just done in the machine. It's not mechanized fabric. It's their love, their sweat, their hard work, and that is something that when you get this cloth, you appreciate it. Like that kente, that you appreciate that's been hard work. There's story within that design. It's not just a design because it looks nice. There's stories within that, and that's what I really love with African fashion and textiles.
So tell us about the Africa Fashion Guide. You self-published it when you were doing your MA, but now it's got another life.
Yeah. So I did my master's in ethical fashion, and I had just had an interest in cotton and the whole supply chain of African textiles. I felt that it was something that wasn't, and a field that wasn't really publicised. There wasn't enough information that was very contemporary. Everything was just about tribal history and slavery and this kind of dark negative view. And I thought, but there's creativity there. There's a lot of new designers that are doing beautiful product. I mean, there's some designers that, if we can go back a little bit, so that's the ASOS Africa collection. We saw Michelle Obama wearing this stuff. This designer here is called Makio, and she uses a technique called Adire, which is like a dye-in and indigo technique in Nigeria. And it's a traditional, it's the one on the right really, traditional technique, but it's just beautiful fashion. And that's what I wanted to show the world, that there's another side. So africafashionguide.com is the website. It's like a platform information. And I also do a conference as well. I did one last week. I can remember what day it is now. Yeah, last week. And it was bringing together the industry, having relationships, encouraging people to build relationships and get together and discuss what they can do and how they can source and produce in Africa. And the book is just something beautiful I wanted to make and really change perceptions. So it's changing your mindset and changing perceptions. So do feel free to have a look afterwards as well.
How do people use the website, and how can people use the book?
The book is really good for studying, for students, for other bloggers, just the whole industry really, to see, because the questions I'm asking the designers are, where are they sourcing in Africa, externally, and where are they producing, and also like the inspiration, the challenges they have, and the positives that they're experiencing within, being a designer of African descent or producing in Africa. So the book is there as like a Bible of designers, contemporary designers, but it's not the end. There's more designers that I could add. And the website also is the same. It's information based. And I also do consultancy as well for people who want to produce or source in Africa. So it's just that one-stop shop for link between Europe, the US and African countries.
Have you got any tales of how it's real people, or any little stories of how it's brought people together? Just even when I was in Kenya, I brought the conference to Kenya, to Nairobi, and everybody was really excited because I had people from the cotton industry. And in Kenya, it is a big issue, cotton, because if there's a lack of rain, then you can't really grow cotton effectively. And then, they had students from the fashion schools. We had designers there, like high-end designers from the industry, manufacturers. I had from the whole supply chain just in Nairobi at this conference. And everyone was just so grateful to have this platform that brought them together.
it wasn't about, because of big names. It was just to bring people together, so they had the chance to really say, look, I'm a designer, you're a factory, what are you, how can we work together so I can get my product out there. So
does African cotton have particular, dark side to it, or does African cotton production, is there, obviously all Indian, all of the different, apart from America, of course, who gets so heavily subsidised, but cotton production can be problematic for...
the good thing about a lot of cotton in Africa is that it's hand-picked, so there's that quality there. But the negative side is the fact that there is cotton in Africa, and it is picked in Africa, it's grown in Africa, but a lot of it is sent out, so to other countries, whatever, and so a lot of the value is lost. If you think about the cotton supply chain, you grow the cotton, you process the cotton, and goes through mills, you have to process it into fabric, and if it's sent out of that producer of the country it's grown in, produced in, then that country will have to buy it back in as a fabric, so there's that big chunk of value lost.
You mentioned to me that so the people lose out the cost. You also mentioned to me it's easier to get African made cotton to England than it is to get it to another African country.
I think I was talking about the general issue of, I always get this word wrong, intra-continent trade versus can't get it right. Basically, trading between countries in Africa is more difficult than Africa to the US or Africa to Europe, and a lot of that is because of the duties and the ports getting things through and dealing with all that. Whereas, say, like with the US, Africa's got this trade policy with them called AGOA, the African Growth Opportunity Act. But the AGOA trade policy, so it allows people to be able to basically get subsidised duties. So it's easier to do that with the US than it is from, say, Nairobi to Lagos, for example.
Yeah. So it's quite fraught. There was some, I remember you telling me about, is this the top you were telling me about on the phone?
Oh, yeah. So this top, so I'm wearing a little bit of African stuff today, or recycled or sustainable product today. So this top is made from a designer called Chichia, who's in the book, and it's just using different fabrics that she sourced locally. She's from Tanzania, and she uses organic cottons, and she's got a workshop back in Tanzania, but it's just a mishmash of different fabrics, the kitenge and the kanga fabrics. You can see the base of it there, where they have, so these words in Swahili usually are about stories, and how people give fabrics, but the Swahili words are stories that they're telling people, or like little references to history or just things they want to say. So this top is from Chichia. The skirt I'm wearing is actually H&M, and it's got recycled polyester in there, which I was quite like, oh, cool. And the necklace is from Johari, so it's made in Nairobi as well, and it's like recycled brass. So there's different things. I want to just show people that it's not just what you may think or envision in your mind is African fashion, and that's Chichia there, by the way, and I made by Africa Project that she collaborated with a factory in Tanzania, so it's organic cotton.
Is she quite a well-known designer in Africa?
For Tanzania, she's one of the top designers, but she just does fun product. Beyonce buys, I think it was this top Beyonce wore at a concert, so it just makes fun stuff, just young, girly, just fun.
Yeah. I wanted to end our little discussion with what's top of your personal manifesto for a more sustainable way to consume fashion. What would you add to the list?
What's top of it is, I think, just being considered in your buying. Do you really need that? I'm not somebody that really, really shops. I do buy secondhand, and I even like that because you can stand out and be different. Why should we all look the same? I don't want to look like all the ladies on here. I want to stand out and look different. So I'll just say it's about being considerate in your consuming and sharing clothes. Yeah, you don't have to just keep buying.
Yeah, I didn't ask you, Kate. What I'm guessing you've probably got 100. Maybe that's why I didn't ask. But would you have one thing that you would put onto the list?
Perhaps I would say to think more, and actually I would tell the little story, if I may, of of a friend of mine who did a bit of an experiment, which was a really interesting experiment. He basically created a rail of clothes and opened a little pop-up shop, and then people were coming in to browse to see what was going on. And the thing is, you couldn't actually buy any of the garments. You could get them, but you had to swap one of the items that you were currently wearing. And before you could swap it, you actually had to fill in a little card that said why you'd bought the garment in the first place, whenever it was, what you liked about it when you first bought it, and why then you'd chosen to swap it. And just that act of reflecting on what it was, why did I buy it, and do I like it? I really like bits of it. That was enough to dissuade pretty much everybody from swapping, and everyone walked out with the same thing that they had on, but with a new appreciation of why it was theirs. It seems to me perhaps that's a good story in this book.
I'm sure that's actually, Jacqueline, the way you actually approach your wardrobe. It seems that you love all the pieces that you have.
Yeah, but I think also because I'm the youngest in my family and the whole hand-me-down thing, so I've got 2 older sisters, so I always got something that they had or something my mother made. So there was and it was just normal. It wasn't shameful. It was he was proud to wear. You looked after your clothes.
Hand-me-down culture, I don't know, it certainly doesn't seem to be as prevalent as it was.
No, definitely not.
Now, speaking of hand-me-down, we're going to get on to not in that way, obviously, but we're going to introduce you to Abigail Chisman, who has a degree in classics from Cambridge and an MA in fashion journalism from St Martin's. She began her career at Vogue, bringing the fashion industry to the masses via Vogue.com. She now runs Designer Jumble, a pop-up fashion business that sells designer fashion at realistic prices and partners with charities and sustainability enterprises. Abby uses Designer Jumble to educate and inform women about what designer fashion really means and the true cost of the clothes we buy. Hello.
Yes, hello.
Abigail, you're undoubtedly an ambassador for the craft of use, which we know from having met you and seen you in action at Designer Jumble. Your love affair and appreciation of clothes started at St Martin's.
That's right.
When you got to know designers such as Tristan Weber or McQueen. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I would say my love of fashion started perhaps younger. I loved clothes, but actually in my years when it came to choosing what I was going to study, I was very much told pretty much across the board that fashion was frivolous, superficial, girly, pretty much every bad word that could be thrown at it. So of course I did a serious degree in classics at Cambridge, and by the time I'd finished there, my love of fashion hadn't evaporated. So I did go on to Central St Martin's, and it was there, I would say, that I was allowed to discover what fashion really was literally made of. So in that sense, my love of fashion started there because I was allowed to watch craftsmen, people making clothes from scratch. I was studying the fashion journalism course, but we were very much alongside the designers. So I would watch people at tables working 12 to 16 hours a day, starting, some of them making their own textiles, printing their own textiles, learning to pattern cut, learning to drape, sewing their own things. It is impossible to come out of an experience like that, a process like that, without having enormous respect for items that are made like that. And I think that's one of the things that I am deeply passionate about. I know we're at a festival about women in all sorts of areas of life, and that fashion is not the most important one, but it is certainly something that we all engage with at some level. We're all dressed today, and I am passionate that we do take, spend more time thinking about not only where this came from, but where it goes to, and respecting the processes that went into this. When you've watched someone make something from scratch, it's impossible not to care about it.
And also, we discussed, and you made the great point that these items are so well made that they simply don't have a shelf life.
Yes, and that's I would like to echo what Jacqueline said about the love-hate relationship with fashion. I also hate this idea that fashion is a trends churn, that it's just the idea that you should wear something one season and the next next season, you're allowed to say, that's so last season. That's the most appalling statement in the world. Never say that. Please, never, ever, ever say that. These items are, I mean, here, for instance, we have a Valentino dress somebody bought for their wedding. It would have cost thousands of pounds.
If anyone would like to have, should we pass it around?
Sure.
Would anyone like to have a little...
I'm not tall enough to get it down. I might need to ask my friend Elle.
No one is.
Who is?
Stand on a chair to get it.
Oh, that's that. Oh, golly, maybe I shouldn't have suggested that then.
Or at the end I can say anyone can come up and touch it.
Yeah, we can come up and do it that way.
I mean, one of the important things about it, you can't see, and this is actually one of the very important things about the difference between well-made stuff and not well-made stuff, is that, you know, the high street can reflect... In a minute, thank you. The high street can reflect what designers put on their catwalk in terms of colour, vaguely in terms of silhouette. It can't use the same fabric. It can't use the same manufacturing processes. This dress has got hand stitching on its petticoat. The petticoat is made of silk that is entirely, obviously, recyclable, but it won't be recycled in its source form because obviously it's beautiful and it's made to last. This is a wedding dress that can be worn 1,000 times, but the beauty is that it can be worn 1,000 times by 1,000 different people. I mean, how kind of cool is that? It's wonderful and joyful. And the fact that I think fashion is often criticised for being expensive. One of the things that I want to say today or get across today is that hopefully if you do come up and look at this closely, you'll see why it's expensive. It's not because it's a statement issue or it's a brand. You are paying for the amount of hours of work that have gone into this dress, and the person who made it was paid fairly. If you do a little bit of maths and assume there's 800 hours of hand stitching in there, multiply it by a minimum wage, you've already got a hefty sum of money there. So add to that the quality of fabric, where that fabric has come from. The other really great thing about high fashion, and particularly brands that do have transparent production lines, is that you know that the fabric has come from, hopefully, from a process that has not involved harm to the planet or people. And of course, from second-hand stuff, the point is that once it's made, me selling it again is causing no extra damage to anybody, obviously. But so the point is that this item cost a lot to make, which is why it costs a lot to sell. Now, once it's been sold to one person who's used it once, we can then pick a price. And one of the things that I try to do, as Melanie said, is to resell these things at decent prices that really people can realistically afford. My friend Elle over here has a pile of things that we brought just properly, randomly, just from my stock.
Oh, good, we've got them. Yeah.
One of them is a pile of things that I would say are things that you could otherwise get from Topshop. There's sort of similar prices. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. This pile here is things that everyone is welcome. We can pass them all around. This pile is things that have been made beautifully that you can pull. You can have a look at the seams. You can see what the hand stitching looks like. You can see they don't look like stuff that's on the high street. So let's get these around. This pile is stuff that I have priced in my shop to be similarly priced to high street. So this is a Lacroix skirt that is £45. And this is a Sonia Rickey jumper that is £55. I brought these two things together because I think the shape, the colour, the clash reflects what Louis Vuitton had on its catwalk last week. And this is a very important point, is that I don't believe designers are putting their ideas out there to try and say, buy this one. They're not. They're trying to communicate.
But the businesses behind them
Exactly. And I would say that for me, the word fashion means something very different to what it means on the high street. To me, fashion is the designer, the creative, the person who's put in hours and hours of dedicated hard work, intelligence, thought about what they feel about the world, and they've just used clothes as their medium. For me, it's an art form like many others. You can make a painting, you can make a sculpture, you can create a piece of clothing that says something about how you feel about the world. And if you do a quick rattle through trends over the last millennium, you can see how closely fashion history reflects social history. I don't know if you want me to do that. I'm going to do it in like 30 seconds. So starting from the beginning of the last millennium, if you can keep up. Poiret, a designer I'm expecting most of you hadn't heard of unless you are passionate.
You can
about
tell
fashion.
we've got a former Vogue editor in the house.
Well, turn of the century was the Belle Epoque. It was about excess. It was, and Poiret was a designer who stopped ladies wearing corsets. It was the beginning of liberation, literally, physically, for women. He took corsets off dresses, but made hobble skirts, so skirts that ladies could only take little tiny steps in. So the idea was that what that reflects socially is the idea that emancipation was beginning, it wasn't complete. We move, and we know that. The suffragette movement then came. Along came Chanel. Chanel used a fabric, jersey, that was actually traditionally till then used for men's underwear fabric. So imagine this. This is actually quite shocking. People are saying, what on earth? What is this woman doing? Well, what do we use jersey for? It's flexible. Women could move. It's sporting. It was sort of the beginning of saying, we want you to do stuff, women. Women started being able to play tennis. Women started being able to move like men. Until then, fashion had literally
held them in.
Incarcerated them. Yeah. Moving on to, let's say, the 1930s, the 40s, the privations of wartime, it was conspicuous that women were choosing to dress down. They were wearing uniform-like dresses. They were showing that, for them at the moment, physical appearance was not the number one thing. They were giving their all to something else. So fashion was very bland, purposefully. Not just because it had to be. Purposefully, they were communicating. The Queen getting married is a good case in point, I think. She didn't wear a flamboyant wedding dress. Of course, then, post-war, the reaction to that, Dior's new look, an explosion of tons of fabric. The rationing period is over. I'm going to make huge skirts, the biggest skirts I can, and I'm going to bring back femininity. Tiny waists, big shoulders. And again, it doesn't seem it now, but at the time this was massively shocking.
Okay, so
sorry, you can tell the passion. Sorry, it's right.
So we definitely get the point. But the point, I guess, now is that none of that's sort of really relevant to what's going on.
No, and so
we should be. What's relevant is kind of what we're talking about and how we should be addressing.
Yeah, so my point, to try and make it short, which is impossible for me, is that fashion is... I did, I told her she's got to stop me. Fashion is about you. It's about you deciding to look the way you feel. It's about, what the beauty of high designers, the best designers do, is that they try to help you talk about what's going on in the world. This picture I have up here is a picture of one of Alexander McQueen's last collections called Horn of Plenty, and this collection was criticised by some people who said that it was a reworking of a whole load of stuff he'd done before. You could, if you want to get philosophical about it, say that actually what he was trying to say was a comment on commercialisation. He was saying, and there's a lot of great stuff I've done before. What's wrong with it? Wear it. It's still good. Fashion is stuck in this idea that you have to change something every 2 weeks. I mean, that's driven by the high street. The high street wants to churn out stock. But that's not actually what high fashion is about. High fashion is about craft, beauty, lasting, and to be passed on. Sorry.
Good, well done. That's all of my questions answered. I don't even need to read them out
I've got
now.
so much more to say.
But I did think it might be quite interesting, because I think... Oh, come on through. Just to ask you a little, just really quickly, about... This is only question 3. She's answered 4, 5 and 6, just FYI. Okay.
Ask me again.
No, what it is I just think it's really interesting that, that you came from passionate care for designer clothing and the craft behind designer clothing, and then you became a Vogue editor and one of the founding editors of Vogue.com. When Vogue had a website and they were like, oh, we don't know what to do with it, and you were like, I think you should be doing this. And seeing what that's become and the sort of pioneering aspect to that idea, you now apply to something very, very different, but not that far away, which is your Designer Jumble.
Yeah.
And you're a passionate advocate, and you share what you're sharing with the room, with people. How do you find the people you interact with in your shop? And do you want to just say a quick word about the Vogue, how those two things, the Vogue and that, tally?
Yeah. So this slide here is just an example of something that I'm sure you're all by now familiar with. The fact that when a designer puts a collection on the catwalk, those images are available online within hours. and I'm afraid that's partially my fault. But to talk you through why we did it, I was recently in fact, I was still at Central St Martin's when I started working at Vogue.com at the age of 21, very earnest. I wanted to make sure that Vogue Online, which had not yet launched, was going to reflect what people like me, age 21, wanted to know about fashion. And that was talking about the designers, the people who are at the forefront of changing the way or illustrating the way we feel about the world through clothes. At the time, it was 1995, most designers didn't want their stuff online. They thought of the internet as a place for pornography and a place where other people could see their designs and then counterfeit them. So I had to tread very carefully. I started with a few designers who were willing to do it. And my argument was that if Marc Jacobs was actually being already copied by the high street and girls were already buying those copies, I wanted the girls to know what they were buying copies of, not just so that the idea wasn't that I expected them to then go and buy the expensive version. Of course, that's unrealistic. But I wanted the designer to have the credit, and I wanted there to be some transparency about what was really driving fashion. I got a few key designers to agree to let me put their items online.
Who were they?
Antonio Berardi. I mean, they started with the London designers. I mean, literally, to begin with, in 1995, I wasn't allowed in any of the catwalk shows because people were so
nobody
worried.
liked the internet.
No. So Antonio Berardi was one, McQueen was one, Helmut Lang was very early in coming on board, and Marc Jacobs let us do it in New York. And they were, and Paul Smith. Sorry, Paul Smith was always there. And communicating with them, they very quickly said, yeah, of course, it's not damaging our business at all.
And do you think that those kind of shows increase the desire for fashion and kind of beget the fast fashion thing, that bubble that took place?
I know this is a very difficult one, and I can't say I know the answer fully. There are lots of things that contribute to fast fashion, but I think as all three of you have already touched on before, I think it does say more about business. It's about businesses need to grow revenues. I don't think it's certainly not fashion journalism's job to try and sell stuff. It's meant to be about communication, and really what we should be, I put these things online without prices. Before they were available in shops, it wasn't about selling them, it was about
communicating, which is
communicating
what you do with the people that walk into your shop now.
That's right. So now, having done it at a journalistic level, I'm talking to people on a daily basis in my shop about why I love individual pieces, why buying something that's 100% wool is better than buying something that's a mix. And yes, so the communication continues. And the thing that I'm finding now is that I'm talking to, obviously, real people. Before, I was talking to a computer and people I worked with. And real people actually seem to care more about this issue, I think, than the media thinks. We often find these stories about environmental stuff on the environmental pages. They really should be in headline news. And it is crazy that it's not, because it does matter to all of you more than it seems to matter to the people whose job it is to tell us about what's going on in the world.
Thank you, Abby. That's really wonderful. Thank you. So now we're going to... Hello, Carrie.
Hello.
This is Carrie Summers. Carrie is the founder of the Panama hat brand Pachacuti, which I said before is the very first fair trade certified company in the world. While researching her PhD in the Andes in the early 1990s, Carrie witnessed first-hand exploitation of the workers and the simultaneous loss of traditional craftsmanship techniques. Eager to help, she abandoned her studies to concentrate on setting up a sustainable fashion brand that treasured the skills of the people she'd met and maintains high standards in the production chain, which it does. More pertinently and more recently, Carrie is also the co-founder of something you'll be hearing a lot about in the next month or so. It's called Fashion Revolution Day, and it's coming up on the 24th of April, the anniversary of the Rana Plaza disaster in Bangladesh, which, as you all know, killed over 1,100 people, injured 2,500 people, and orphaned 800 children. I haven't touched on this in the introduction, but when Carrie abandoned her MA to begin her hat company, she borrowed some money from a friend and had that money on her, and was it gunpoint or knife point that you were robbed?
No, I wasn't robbed at gunpoint, but I got 2 death threats afterwards.
Right. Yeah. So
and the thief had a gun.
Yeah. The thief had a gun. So Carrie came back to London, had lost the money, and ended up living. Was it living?
Living in a van for 9 months.
Yeah. It's a huge sacrifice, but for you at that time, I guess that helping the people was your number one priority.
Yes, it was, and I could already see how reliant people were on the work I was giving them through setting up and working with the small cooperatives there. And it just seemed a really obvious choice to me to give up my PhD and concentrate on trying to improve their lives.
And in the 20 years that you've been doing it, how have their lives changed?
Well, it's been really interesting because over the last 5 or 6 years we've worked on 3 big international pilot projects. 2 of these have been about fair trade certification, and the other one was the Geo Fair Trade project, which was really fascinating because it was about measuring our impact on our producer groups. And so often we talk about ethics and we talk about fair trade, but we don't really have the figures. We can't even see whether we are improving. We can't see if we're reducing our energy use, our carbon footprint. So this was really incredibly important for us because it gave us very useful information. For instance, discovering that only 37% of our Panama hat weavers had even completed primary education meant that we worked a lot more visually. We created visual health and safety toolkits. We used something like eco-mapping, which followed each production route back. So we looked at health and safety, at the storage of chemicals, at water and waste. And this was a way in which we could engage all of the producers and the workers in the supply chain. And this is something which was so clearly lacking in Bangladesh in the sort of audit-focused social responsibility model. Another thing which was really exciting as part of the Geo Fair Trade project is we actually mapped the GPS coordinates of each one of our weavers' houses.
That's up on the screen, I think, there,
and
isn't
this
it?
wasn't easy. I mean, as you can see, this is a really remote mountainous area, and only 45% of our weavers' houses were even accessible by road. So this was a really sort of difficult project, but it was so worth it because now our customers can see the direct impact of their purchases on identifiable groups of producers. But also for our Panama hat weavers, they're really excited that people can now trace the Panama hat back to its true country of origin, to Ecuador, and even to the very weaver's house who actually made that hat.
That's really incredible. So, hang on, sorry, I've just lost my train of thought. So of course we're able to see exactly where your hats are coming from. Meanwhile, most people haven't got a clue where their clothes on their back came from. Not sure what country they were made in, not sure what they're made from. Why do you think that is, Carrie?
Well, numerous surveys have shown that shoppers really do care, and that they would even be prepared to pay a little bit more to a company or for an item of clothing if it was more ethically sourced. But the problem is if we as consumers try to find out about the provenance of the garments we're wearing, we're really not going to get very far.
Yeah, this is true.
And there was a survey which came out recently, an Australian fashion report, and it said that 61% of brands don't know where their clothes are made. 76% don't know the origin of the fabric, where it was woven or dyed or knitted, and 93% of clothing brands don't know the origin of the raw material. So how are we as consumers, the average consumer can't find out where their clothes are from if the brands don't know where the clothes are from? And this is why, for the first Fashion Revolution Day, we've chosen the theme of who made your clothes. It seems like a really simple question. It seems like a question which people should be able to answer. But unfortunately, the brands can't answer this question. And certainly I really believe that greater transparency is a prerequisite to improving standards.
And why is it that 93% don't know where their raw materials are coming from? Is there something wrong with the governmental system? What's allowing that to happen?
It's mostly because of fast fashion and because of the extreme lengths of the supply chains. So a lot of buyers now don't even buy directly from the factories, they'll be buying from big trade shows. There's a lot of subcontracting. So it's really down to the length of the supply chain.
Yeah, whenever you read about something that's gone wrong, it's always someone blaming a third party. So so people, high street chains, want to tell you where their things are from? Or is it or they can't? Or which way round is it?
It's both. They can't and they don't want to.
Yeah. I mean, does everyone here know where their clothes are from, what they're made from, where they've come from? Oh, hey! Good, you can tell us about it in a few minutes. So now, Rana Plaza. Everyone knew that something was going to happen in Bangladesh because there'd been a number of fires escalating and everyone could see it was just a tragedy somewhere. A tragedy was going to happen, but yet nothing kind of happened. Nothing was done to stop it, or at least the auditing. When Carrie mentioned the auditing system, for those of you who aren't familiar, all factories that make clothing for retailers have to be checked. It's a bit like the Ofsted system, I suppose. You go along with a clipboard and someone audits the factory and says whether it's okay or not. A lot of the time, from what I've read, I'm not an expert anywhere near as much as these guys, but if it's okay, then the factory gets a little green mark and people continue to make the clothes there. But oftentimes they'll be slightly, made to look good for the day. But up until Rana Plaza, they weren't checking structure on buildings, were they? There was no structural checks, from what I've read, and which is why there are now, apparently. But that's why this factory collapsed, because it had been left just festering, and then it collapsed. So you knew that something was going to happen. Well, everyone did.
Yeah, no, I mean, everyone did it. It was definitely a disaster waiting to happen. But I think it's also important to know that it was a disaster which really could have happened in any fast fashion producing country.
Right.
Rana Plaza just happens to be in Bangladesh, and it probably is one of the worst in terms of safety standards. I mean, actually, since 1990, 2,200 Bangladeshi workers have been killed in around 300 separate health and safety incidents. But it took something of this scale to garner the attention of the world's media. Most of the other smaller incidents had gone unreported. There was the Spectrum disaster where 64 people were killed in 2005, and again this was as a result of building cracks which went unreported. And there was the start of some change. There was the first fire and building safety agreement, but at that time the brands really weren't interested and there wasn't enough pressure on them to sign these agreements. And the Rana Plaza building itself didn't have its proper building permits in place. It was built on a reclaimed swamp. It was initially supposed to be a 6-storey building. 2 floors were built illegally and a 9th floor was in the process of construction at the time of the disaster. And not one of the audits from the many Western companies which were auditing those factories had been incorporating building assessments into their audits.
So after it happened, you said you felt you had quite a complex range of feelings. You were angry, but you were sort of slightly deflated. What was I remember you saying to me that you'd kind of just thought, I just need take some time out. I'm going to just have a bath and have a think.
I did, and I think I was also feeling probably even slightly smug, actually. I was thinking of so many articles in that week about this is why we need a more ethical fashion industry, this is why we need more transparency and traceability. And I was a bit like, well, I'm doing this, finally people might realise why. We spend months traipsing around the countryside to get the GPS coordinates for our weavers, which people didn't seem particularly interested in. This would finally show why we need more transparent supply chains. And so I wasn't one of those people in the very first days who were having meetings and trying to work out what they could do. And it was only on the Sunday after the Rana Plaza disaster happened when I had a bath and I made the mistake of not listening to the archers, which I normally do in the bath. My brain obviously had time to start ticking over. And suddenly this idea of Fashion Revolution Day popped into my head. And I don't even know if I can really claim it was my idea, because it just suddenly appeared there. And it seemed like a good enough idea to get out of the bath I just got into on a Sunday night and email Ursula de Castro, who is the co-founder of Estetica, which is the ethical section at London Fashion Week, known as the Queen of Upcycling. And I thought she'd be a great person to run this idea past. And so the next morning I'd received Ursula's very enthusiastic response. And then Lucy Siegel phoned me from The Observer. She writes the Ethical Living column. And she was equally convinced that a Fashion Revolution Day was just what we needed to channel this current concern into a long-standing campaign, so that not just the people who died at Rana Plaza, but all of the other disasters which have happened in the name of fashion wouldn't be forgotten. This would really be the catalyst and the impetus to start to create a more sustainable future.
It seems you definitely have started a revolution from what I've heard. There's 40 countries taking part. Maybe it's gone up since the last time. How many is it now?
It's nearly 50. I think we're on about 48.
Wow. You've got a huge amount of support across the world, and politics, celebrities, factory work, people, big companies. The momentum behind it's certainly infectious. How do you see the day itself? What's going to happen on the day? 24th of April.
Yes, it's the 24th of April 2014 is the first Fashion Revolution Day. And I've been in a really privileged position. So I've been the person who's been liaising with all of our teams around the world as they come on board and seeing just the amazing things which people are doing. So in Barcelona, in Bangladesh, they're doing fashion shows through the middle of the city. In Bangladesh, the producers are going to be wearing the garments which they're making every day. We're working with one of the factories there, Operaggio, which is one of the really success stories after Rana Plaza. The workers have got together and they've started producing better quality items. It's a worker-owned factory, and they're saying that they love the idea of Fashion Revolution Day because it's about celebrating the positive, and they're saying that all the press are interested at the moment is the negative fallout from the Rana Plaza disaster. They're not interested in the positive stories and how are we going to move on, how are we going to celebrate best practice and start to change. In some countries we've got really practical workshops happening, like in Nepal they're doing a workshop on how to clean up your dye within the dye industry, how to recycle water. There's an eco-film festival happening in South Africa. I mean, it's really incredible to see what people are doing around the world. In Swaziland, they said to me, we really don't know what we're going to do. We're a really small country. We've got a small team here. And then 2 weeks later, they said, we've got cameras for all the producers. They're documenting their lives. They're documenting their work. We're going to put on an exhibition at the Bushfire Festival. Then this exhibition is going to tour around the world. And it's just incredible to see what people are doing. They're just taking this whole idea and running with it. It's amazing.
It is. It's so exciting. And there's 4 strategic objectives, isn't there? That and it's also you're going to do it each year, and each year it's going to be a different question. So, do you want to quickly run us through the objectives?
Yes. So our objectives are: we want to raise awareness of the true cost of fashion and its impact at every stage in the process of consumption and disposal. We want to show the world that change is possible through celebrating all of those people who are already involved in creating a more sustainable future for fashion. And we want to bring people together the length of the supply chain. This is one of the really exciting things about Fashion Revolution Day, is that we've involved the entire value chain, from the farmers to the factory workers, from the brands to the buyers. Baroness Lola Young of Hornsey has said that this is possibly the first global movement of the 21st century, which has brought everybody together globally in one movement. And it's really exciting that we can tell those stories, that we've engaged the producers in telling the stories to the consumers. And then finally, we want to work towards long-term industry-wide change, and we want to get consensus from the entire supply chain about what needs to happen.
Do you think that fourth point, working towards long-term industry-wide change, what do you think the first thing? I mean, I would have thought getting labelling and getting provenance inside clothing labels, so we all understand where our things come from. Would that be near the top of the list, or would it be more practical concerns to do with the farms or fibre production?
I mean, if we could get proper labelling in the garments, that would be incredible. But I talked to Catherine Hamnett about this recently. This was a campaign she was interested in running, and she discovered that it was going to be almost impossible. I mean, at the moment, the country of origin on your garments could have very little to do with the country in which they were produced. I mean, if you look at Panama hats, for example, they're all woven in Ecuador. You'll find a lot of Panama hats which say made in England, made in Italy, because that's where they're finished. And so, yes, labelling is important, but I mean, really it's about everybody in the supply chain. The fashion industry is burying its head in the sand. Unfortunately, a lot of the fashion magazines are too. Have you seen an April issue of one of the fashion glossy magazines which has even mentioned Rana Plaza yet? It's very sad, and I think this is why the message of Fashion Revolution Day and Who Made Your Clothes is so important, because we can bring the truth from the voice of the cotton farmer, from the voice of the mill dyer, from the weaver, from the factory worker, and connect directly to the consumers. Because we as consumers have incredible power to make change within the industry. And if there is to be change, then every part of that supply chain has to play a part, and that means us as well.
So for all of us in this room to engage in Fashion Revolution Day, we need to show our allegiance. It's to we wear our clothes inside out on the day, is that right?
We do. I mean, it's about changing our relationship to fashion. So what we're saying is we want people to be curious, find out, and do something about it. So the be curious is about wearing an item of clothing inside out. You don't need to wear your whole outfit inside out, but wear your jacket inside out. Look at the label. If you've got children, encourage them to get their school involved. So all of the kids go to school with their jumpers or their shirts inside out. We've got some amazing resources online for school children. We want you to find out. We want you to tweet the brand or contact them on Facebook and say, please, can you tell me who made my clothes? Not just in what country are they made, not just from what factory are they made. Can you tell me who made my clothes? I don't think anybody yet has had a reply saying who made their clothes. There are some amazing brands in the UK that do put the names of the producers in each garment and each item of clothing, but most of the brands don't know, and we want to tell them that consumers are interested in knowing. And then we want to do something about it. We want hundreds of thousands of people on the day to make this gesture, because in turn this is then going to raise awareness within the industry that we do need to continue, and in some cases even start the process of change.
Well, I think it's brilliant. I think we'll all hopefully be turning our clothes inside out on the 24th.
May I add something to that, just in a... I can't shut up. One of the very important things is we've heard here that 50 countries are signing up to it. But just like, people often say on a sort of popular vote, don't assume it's going to work. It needs everybody to do something. Saying that there are 50 countries involved, it does mean that each of you are hopefully, you're going to have to actually actively start asking the question. I just want to remind, has anyone seen the film The End of the Line, which was about overfishing? And how our fish stocks were depleting at such a level that we were going to run out of fish. This film ended with the message, but something can be done about it. If you all start asking the question, where did this fish come from? Literally in your restaurant saying, is this sustainably sourced? In your supermarkets, is this sustainably sourced? If you start asking the question, the supermarkets and the restaurants are going to have to respond. And what's lovely is that film is now having a sequel made to tell the story of how it has been changed. It has been changed. All of Britain's supermarkets now have to list. They list because consumers don't want non-sustainably sourced fish.
But we were talking about this at a dinner I was at last night, and one of my friends looks after John. This is going slightly off topic, but anyway, they look after John West Fish, and John West had the biggest. They were the ones that were doing all the unsustainable fishing, etc. Apparently, they've set up a company that sells all the value fish to every supermarket going. And it's completely unsustainable. It's got another name, and they won't admit to it being anything to do with them. But so they're doing the right thing on one level and the wrong thing on another.
Yeah, and it does, and it requires for the people buying this stuff to keep saying. I mean, what would it take for you to, as you're going to a till, walk up and say, do you know where this came from? So that the people who are selling this stuff know that you care.
Yeah, it's great. Now, panel, amazing. It's not over yet, but thank you, everyone. I think they deserve a clap. We still have a little bit of time. Now, I've seen Dr Kate Fletcher making notes. I'm a little bit scared, but she did say to me while we were chatting before that she might ask us some questions, and I don't think there's anyone better to throw some challenges. But also, I'd like all of you, when the time comes, to now start thinking about how we're going to create the manifesto for change. We have our flipboard, we have a pen, so just it might end up being 5 things, or might even be just one thing. But I'm giving the floor to Kate now.
Thank you. Well, I don't know whether I was going to ask everybody questions, but I just thought, given that we've got Melanie here, who was one of the founding editors of Grazia magazine, I thought it would be a very interesting question to ask about the role of fashion media in a sustainability discussion. We rarely get to talk with people who are engaged with fashion media about what this is, about a sense of a role and a responsibility in the sustainability discussion, perhaps about engaging with consumption levels. But I also would like to ask about what you think the role of fashion is in creating different visions of the future, other than just a view of fashion as consumption, as buying multiples just in different colours, as a volume industry. I mean, so first of all, I suppose it's a 2-part question. So the first, what about the responsibility of fashion in creating the sustainability problem? And what about its role in creating some sort of sense of other options and possibilities?
Yeah, being of the problem and offering a solution. I mean, Abby will nod her head, and you could try to put a sustainability story into any magazine that contains an advertiser, and you will be finding it very difficult to get that story published. That's the big problem.
Yeah.
Okay. And unfortunately, these magazines in particular are incorrectly, and which is why I no longer work every day at Grazia. I was one of the founding editors there. And for many years, we shared enthusiasm and told people about how you can enjoy fashion. But in the end, you realise that all you're doing is you're feeding the machine, and it's so you can't say, well, I think we should be more sustainable about this. Let's say, don't buy that Louis Vuitton. Don't show people things, but that just won't work with the business. The business suits won't like it. So you have to find another way. You have to go outside of that remit and then try to change things from the inside. So my objective now is to try to find a way to cover fashion in a way that encourages people to act sustainably, and hope that we can get everyone else to kind of change their ways, because obviously it needs to happen. Does that make sense?
So,
sorry.
No, go on.
I was just going to question if that's a discussion between the designers as well as the media, because the designers do want their clothing presented a particular way, and you have someone like Vivienne Westwood who has her campaigns as well, and if they're giving that out as, this is how I want my clothes to be presented, I want this story to come through, like the label Honest Buy, which is really trying to be transparent in its sourcing and its supply chain, then maybe that is about communicating between all the actors in the field.
I think the biggest blame for the fashion system is laid at the door of making money and business. And if you've got no control over that side of things, then working in any media organisation where they care that Chanel's going to advertise with them, or they care about those things, you'll never have a true voice. And that is the biggest problem, and that the fashion media has, is that it's actually lost its ability to be truthful. And when you've done it as I have done, I began passionately in the same way that Abigail did, and believing in design and believing in craft and all of those things. It's actually quite a disappointment when you realise that actually I really want to write about Rana Plaza. Oh no, I don't want that story. Some of the biggest magazines in this country have turned that story down. It's actually it's really awful to know, but it's true.
I would say that we were discussing on the phone about whether the speed of the internet to get stuff published was a contributing factor to the pace of fashion turnover. I would just like to add that actually the internet is a fantastically powerful tool for communicating the right messages.
Yes, it is.
I think you probably are all aware of we were talking earlier about the PETA campaign against getting cheap Angora out of the high street. That was something that was posted, a video posted on viral media. It didn't have to go via journalists, and it had a massive impact. So again, just to reiterate the idea that this is in our hands as consumers to change, and if we do recognise that, yes, a lot of fashion journalists kind of have their hands tied now,
but we've got to stop that, and that's my ambition now.
Well, and so I use social media massively to communicate how I feel about fashion and the way that it's, because it's the most powerful tool we have, I think, and it is where other people are willing to also voice their concerns.